Rolling around to 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm Kristen Lodge. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. Welcome to the vaccine Q&A session with the Chelan-Douglas Health District and the Department of Health. Our mission at the museum is to engage and educate in the Wenatchee Valley community. Our museum also serves as a community forum, a place where you can meet with your neighbors, learn about issues important to our community, and discuss your thoughts and opinions. While we're not able to gather at the museum right now, we're enjoying the opportunity to gather virtually in forums like this until we can be back together again in person. Our goal today is to provide the community with the opportunity to discuss public health, to get your questions answered about the COVID-19 vaccine, availability, locations, safety, and efficacy. Today we have Spanish translation provided by Angelica with Claris Languages. I'm going to screen share here so we can invite our participants to join us on the Spanish channel. If you're logged into Zoom, you have the option of listening to the translated audio channel, and you can do that by clicking on the icon of the globe and selecting the Spanish option. Leading the conversation is Dr. Malcolm Butler, Health Officer with the Chelan-Douglas Health District, and Dr. Peter Houck, Senior Epidemiologist with the Washington State Department of Health. I'll be on hand today to moderate today's session. We encourage those that are joining us via Zoom or Facebook Live to join in the discussion and ask your questions. If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to leave a question in comments. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can ask a question using Q&A or chat. I'll monitor your questions and do my best to make sure they get answered. I'd like to give Dr. Butler and Dr. Houck the opportunity to share some information with you first, and then we'll open it up to your questions. Dr. Butler, let's begin with you. Thanks for being here today.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Kristen.
Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Very happy to be here with you. Dr. Houck and I were just discussing how lovely it is outside right now. We're doing this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday. So yeah, I did not put together any slides or anything like that. What I can tell you is that overall, we're coming down off our third wave. The numbers are down around 210 per 100,000 per 14 days right now, which is the lowest we've been since the 2nd of November. We've got our schools open and kids back in classroom at least half time. The mass vaccination site is working well. We've heard word that our mass vaccination site in Chelan County is one of the best in the state as far as efficiency and effectiveness goes. And I would say the rest of us are, the rest of the vaccination providers are desperately hungry for enough vaccine to get out and vaccinate our patients. So those would be my initial comments. I'll hand it over to Dr. Houck.
Well, thank you, Dr. Butler. Thank you for having both of us on today. First, a little full disclosure. I was a contractor with the state until 2 days ago when the contract ended. I was a volunteer with both the state and the health district prior to July, and I'm back as a volunteer again. So now I'm just a volunteer retired epidemiologist, happen to be helping out in what was, it is my hometown. Even though I live in Seattle right now, I grew up in Wenatchee, and I'm quite pleased to have been able to do some help. Malcolm mentioned the vaccination program. I will say that I noticed in the Seattle newspaper this morning, they listed the number of vaccinations given in different counties around the state. And I think you can be very proud that Chelan County, on a number of doses per 10,000 population, was the second highest in the entire state at something about close to 2,800 doses per 10,000 population. I think the only higher county was Clallam County, but we're doing, when I say we, I mean the people who are actually doing the work are doing a spectacular job, and I think you should be very proud of them. I am.
Wonderful. Thank you both for joining us and for sharing that with us. So let's get accessibility out of the way first. When is it my turn to get a vaccine, and how do I sign up?
Yeah. So the governor and the Washington State Department of Health have put together a priority list We are desperately short of vaccine. The state is receiving probably about a third of the amount of vaccine that it is requesting, and then that trickles down to the local level here. And so because we are in essence needing to ration the vaccine that we have right now, there's a priority list that's been put together. And that wasn't just pulled out of the air. That was put together with a lot of thought and discussion to make sure that we are vaccinating the most vulnerable first, and we are not ignoring issues of social justice. So that said, if you have access to the internet, and I'm assuming anybody who's watching this now probably does, you need to Google Washington Phase Finder. And that'll take you to a very simple questionnaire, and you don't even need to enter personal demographic information. You just have to put in your age and what kind of healthcare conditions you may have and that sort of thing. And it'll tell you if you are eligible to be vaccinated now. If you are, then you can take that information forward to a vaccination site. Now that's where things get a little bit more challenging. In Wenatchee at the Town Toyota Center, we do have what we're calling our mass vaccination site. There are 4 sites, well, I think 7 sites like this set up around the state. And there's a very specific way that you need to get in queue to participate at the Town Toyota Center. Honestly, right now, today, that's probably the first place you should try to go because they have the most consistent supply of vaccine. They're getting around 1,000 doses, and they're shooting for 1,000 doses per day. And they've been very close to that and been very successful. So the way you would get in with the Town Toyota Center is there are some phone numbers you can call, and then there's a website you can go to. And I apologize, Kristen, I don't have those at my fingertips, so I'm hopeful that you can provide those
Yes,
for us.
absolutely. We have museum staff on the back end who are going to add those websites and phone numbers to the chat in Zoom and to comments on Facebook. So that information will be provided there.
Yeah. So obviously, if you don't have access to a computer or if you don't have good computer literacy, it can be very frustrating to try and get in there. Cafe Alma Chacon and Cafe is working to help facilitate that for especially the Latinx community that may not have high computer literacy, or there may be some language barriers. So there's also a phone number you can call for that facilitated access for the Latinx community.
Dr. Butler, if I may ask you to speak a bit more slowly so our translator can keep up.
Sí, o puedo hablar en español y si quieres. Anyway, sorry about that. Yeah, that number should be below also. The way that system works is that they open up the schedule on Sunday when they know about how many doses they will have for the following week. And then the phone lines open and the scheduling system opens, and they just keep it open until it's full. And once it's full, they're more or less done for the week. We have had the experience of some people signing up when they should not have, and some additional openings happening during the week. So if you cannot get in on a Sunday, you might check back a couple times during the week to see if there is any availability. But if not, you'll need to wait till the following Sunday. And then you drive in, the whole thing is done inside your car. You'll meet with a team of very nice people there. My understanding is, actually, I'm going to have Dr. Houck explain to us what his experience was like because he went through that system.
Well, Malcolm, thank you. I went through it both at Confluence, where I was actually vaccinated, and I walked through it at Town Toyota Center. And I can tell you, I was impressed with the efficiency at both places. I'll just mention Town Toyota Center first, since that's where most of you might be getting vaccination. You have an appointment, you drive in, someone's there to greet you and tell you where to go. If you are in one of the age eligible group, say you're 67 years old, as I am, they tell you to go over this way, and you're screened with a couple of questions about whether are you sick right now, basically. They take your temperature, they move you on to another tent. You're still in your car, by the way, all this time. They move you on to a tent where you actually receive the vaccination. and then they direct you over to park your car and wait for 15 minutes if this is your first dose and you've never had a bad reaction, 30 minutes if it's your first dose and you have had some kind of bad reaction to something in the past, or 5 minutes if it's your second dose. That's just to see if you are going to have one of these really serious allergic reactions, like anaphylaxis, we call it. It's very quick. I think most people are in and out in a matter of 20 minutes or so. Very quick, very easy. I was just incredibly impressed with how efficient they are. I was told that the average amount of time spent at the vaccination tent, where they actually put the needle in your arm, is about 21 seconds per person. That is fast. They have several tents where they can do that, so it's not like they're throwing needles into people. But it's really, really quick and really easy. Same thing I experienced at Confluence. A very efficient, friendly group registered me when I came in. I waited for maybe about 5 minutes, was taken to a place where a nurse gave me my injection. And I can tell you, I didn't feel a thing. In fact, I asked her after, said, wait a minute, when are you going to give the vaccine? Because she was so good. There's no pain whatsoever. Then I was directed out to sit for 15 minutes. I got my appointment to come back for my second dose. And I think I was in and out of the hospital where Confluence is doing its work in about 25 minutes total, including the 15-minute waiting time. So it was extraordinarily efficient.
That's wonderful. I would love to take this opportunity to thank the healthcare workers, the staff, and the volunteers for what an incredible job they're doing to make that process so streamlined. Sounds like once people are able to get an appointment, that's a wonderful process. It does sound like there's many cancellations and difficulty keeping appointments. What suggestions do you have for someone who's made an appointment and received cancellations many multiple times? Should they stay on the same track or broaden their horizons there?
Yeah, that's just a super difficult question. So I'm going to tell you some stories about Columbia Valley Community Health. And I guess I wanted to say something more. I'm going to just jump the queue here a little bit, Kristen. So if you elect not to go through the Town Toyota Center, then your healthcare provider will reach out to you and invite you to come in to get vaccinated when it's appropriate. So, for example, I work at Columbia Valley Community Health. And we started off, we ran a report of how many patients we have who are over the age of 65. But we couldn't fit all of them in one day. So then we looked at the number of people we have over 85. And we had about 100 people. And so we made a schedule and invited them all to come in and get vaccinated. And then we found out that we weren't going to get any vaccine that week. And it turns out the day following that, we had planned to have all the people over the age of 75, another 100 people. So we had 200 people scheduled. And we said, not to worry, we're going to push you to next week. And so we pushed everybody to next week. Of course, that's calling 200 people and answering all of their questions. We pushed them all to next week. And we said, don't worry, we're going to take good care of you. And then the following week, we got exactly 0 vaccine. So as frustrating as it is for people waiting to get a shot, I promise you it's 200 times more frustrating for us. And so we're being told that the supply is increasing and that every day we're more likely to get more. But I think as of right now, today, I would focus on the Town Toyota Center because they have the most consistent supply. I know that many of my patients only want to come and see me because they trust me and they don't trust anybody else. And if you're in a safe place where you have been hunkered down for the last 10 months, keeping yourself safe, you can probably tolerate to hunker down for a few more weeks until my clinic actually has the vaccine in place and can give it to you. But if that doesn't feel like your situation and you're willing to keep trying to get in the queue, that's what I would recommend. We have no way to predict when we're going to get vaccine. And again, full transparency, on Sunday, Columbia Valley Community Health found out we were going to get 1,000 doses to give out this week. We started scrambling, calling everybody back in on Monday. we found out we may not get any of those doses. And that's the kind of craziness we're coping with. So hold tight. There will eventually be plenty of vaccine for everybody. Keep trying all the standard places. And as of today, the Town Toyota Center has the best supply. Dr. Houck, I don't know if you would disagree with any of that.
I agree with you totally, Dr. Butler, and I'll add one more little piece just to give people perspective as to why this is so difficult to administer and why patience, as in being patient, not being a patient, is the key word. The priority scheme that the state put out basically includes everybody over the age of 50. Now, the people between 50 and 65, you're supposed to have a multi-generational household. But we're basically talking about everybody over 50. In Chelan-Douglas County, there are about 50,000 people over the age of 50 that we're trying to vaccinate. And the gate was basically open to all those people at the same time. And somewhat expectedly, it's difficult for everybody to get an appointment, given that we have a very small supply of vaccine compared to this relatively large number of people who are eligible. So just be patient. You can be absolutely, totally, 100% sure that people like the folks at Toyota Town Center, at Confluence, at Columbia Valley Community Health, at the Health District, at Cascade Medical, at Lake Chelan Community Hospital, all these places are doing their very, very, very best to get 2 doses of vaccine into your arm as soon as it possibly can. It's really hard, though. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to give you the perspective as to why this is so bloody difficult. And Malcolm gave another example, the continually changing expectation of the supply we're going to have. It's really, really hard.
Which supply does our community have and how is it allocated? We've been hearing that our community in Chelan and Douglas County is doing such a good job that we're hearing about vaccine tourism.
Yeah.
Should we be concerned about that, as there's so many in our community who are unable to get vaccines?
Yeah, no, that it's interesting. So my understanding of how the process works is that the state applies to the federal government, tells them how many doses they want that week, and then they end up with a third to a half of that. And then they, out of the bucket, if you will, that the state has, the first scoop goes to the mass vaccination sites. And so that's how we know the mass vaccination sites will always have a consistent supply. And after that, the rest of it is apportioned out based on the size of the population to each individual county. That was moderately difficult when we were giving out first doses. But then after 3 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on which vaccine it is, now you've got to start doing second dosages. And unfortunately, because there were people who, there were health districts around the state who may have, not health districts, that's not fair, I'm sorry. There were vaccination groups, vaccinators, who used up their second doses giving first doses because they had been instructed to do that, being told there would be plenty of doses coming in the mail. And when the plenty of doses coming in the mail didn't show up, people started to scramble. And so the state then had to pull back on some of their promised dosages to make whole the people who had used up their second doses giving first doses. Sorry, it's super complex. So yes, there is a degree of ag tourism. It is small. It's, I don't know, 1% or 2%. It's a very small
I heard
number.
a report today from a Town Toyota representative that it's 20% of our Town Toyota vaccination.
That's news to me. Now, to be clear, Town Toyota Center is for our region. So it is for Okanagan, Chelan, Douglas, and Grant counties. The last numbers I heard were much smaller than that. I was hearing in like the 10 to 15 a day. Out of multiple hundreds of doses a day. So what you heard, Kristen, is new information for me. Now, again, this is a state resource which is giving out state vaccines. These vaccines are not for Wenatchee. These vaccines are for Washington State, and they're being housed in Wenatchee for our region. So, there's sort of an ethical dilemma. If you have an 85-year-old who drove from Seattle and had to make 5 bathroom stops and got caught in the snow on the way over, and she shows up and wants her vaccine, are you going to say no? It's difficult. And my personal feeling is that there's enough vaccine hesitancy around that if people are that very interested in getting a vaccine, we should honor that. Now, obviously, it won't work if the entirety of King County drives over to Chelan County. But my understanding is those numbers were fairly small. I don't know, Peter, if you have other information on that.
I think that's correct, Malcolm. I had a chance to look a couple of days early last week. I looked through the appointment uh, logbook at Toyota Town Center, and most of the people were from, actually most were from Chelan-Douglas counties. I was surprised how few were from Okanagan and Grant counties, and there were a number from King, from Whatcom, from Benton Franklin, but I was not shocked by how many there were from out of the region. Um,
And I would say also, there's a lot of people who have second homes here. In fact, Dr. Houck has a home here.
I pay taxes there.
But that's where we live, right? And so if somebody has a home in Leavenworth, but they make their living in Seattle, again, that makes it a little complex.
You talked a little bit about how the vaccine is being allocated. Within our own community, we've seen a disparity in the demographics of the virus spread. Can you tell us a little bit more about how our community is mitigating health inequalities such as social, economic, environmental?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can tell you the great plans we have, and I can tell you that we are not able to implement those great plans until we have vaccine to do it. But before I tell you our great plans, it's important that everybody understands that mathematically, the quickest way for us to win the war against COVID is to get as much vaccine into as many humans as quickly as possible. And the most efficient way to do that is to ask people to come to the needle. That is to say, asking people to come to a mass vaccination site where you can have 10 vaccinators vaccinating 1,000 people a day. It's just more efficient to do it that way, regardless of their income level, literacy level, skin color, language, anything. Mathematically, that's the best way to do it. However, we all know that this disease is far from equitable. It is more likely to cause grave illness in people who are elderly and people who have chronic medical conditions. And for sure, we want to protect those people and we want to put a priority on those people. Now, the plans we have are that when possible, when Confluence Health and Columbia Valley and Cascade all have a steady supply of vaccine, we will be calling in our vulnerable patients. So at Columbia Valley, we have a history of focusing on the Latinx community and on uninsured populations, on populations who are homeless. And so we are their doctor already, and we will reach out to those people and we will invite them to come into our clinic and get vaccinated. We also have a mobile clinic, and we can take a crew out to Plain or out to Waterville or out to an orchard if we need to vaccinate folks. We have plans in place to take what we call a strike team out to the large agricultural facilities, and we'll just vaccinate the entire workforce. We are working with the local superintendents so that we can get vaccine out to the school districts and out to the schools and utilize the school nurses to actually vaccinate their own staff. We know that CAFE, as I mentioned earlier, is working right today to try and get folks into the Town Toyota Center. So I believe it's 150 slots per day are being set aside for the Latinx community so that they can get a priority entrance into there. And it's facilitated, right? So there's some help available for that. I just before this meeting got off a call with the federal government, and our community health center is now going to be receiving vaccine directly from the federal government so that we can go out and reach these vulnerable populations who don't have a computer to get an appointment at Town Toyota Center, or maybe don't feel comfortable coming into somewhere where the National Guard is helping out. So we do have big plans in place to help, but first we need the vaccine.
As you talk a bit about the federal government stepping in there, it reminds me of a question about the FDA. I see that the FDA has issued an emergency approval of this vaccine. What differentiates that from a full approval?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it more or less falls in the realm of how do I know I can trust that this is a safe vaccine, right? So let me first go after that a little bit. Remember that in this country, we've been developing vaccines for over 100 years. So there's a long track record of doing that. The two vaccines available today by Pfizer and Moderna are a new type of vaccine, but not the first of this type. So this type of vaccine has been around and has been tested in animal populations for years. And so the standard way that a vaccine would be approved is that the company that is building the vaccine or developing the vaccine is going to come up with a good idea, and they're going to design it, and they're going to test it on a few dozen people to make sure that it seems to do what it is supposed to do. And then when they've got that evidence, they're going to go out to some venture capitalists and they're going to try and raise some money, or they may go to the federal government and try and raise money to do more. And when they get that money, 6 months, a year later, they will then do a much larger study. And after they've got that information, then they're going to ask for even more money another year or two later, do a much, much bigger study, and then they're going to get approval. After they've gotten approval, they will then build a factory and start producing the vaccine. Whole thing takes 5 to 10 years. What was different this time was the federal government said, here is a dump truck full of money. Take all the money you need and get us this vaccine as soon as you can. And so all of those processes were happening at the same time. So we didn't need to wait for the fundraising, if you will. So they've done the 4 phases of the trial that they needed to do. They've tested it, each of these on over 30,000 patients. And then they observed those people for a couple of months to make sure that there was no ill effect. And then they could prove that the vaccine was 95% effective. So for sure, it was accelerated. But all of the important steps happened. It was finally reviewed by a group of people who don't have a financial interest in this, and all the science was reviewed and approved. So the process was the same, but much condensed because the funds were available. The factories were being built while the studies were ongoing, which is how we have it today. Now, emergency use authorization is only allowed to happen during a declared emergency, which is what we have. It's also only allowed to happen when there are no other treatments available. So if you think about a lot of pharmaceuticals, maybe there's a blood pressure medicine. We've already got 20 blood pressure medicines, so there's no hurry for a new blood pressure medicine. But if we're talking about a treatment for HIV or a treatment for cancer or a vaccine for COVID, there's nothing else out there. And so then we're allowed to start using the medication. And as we are using it, the studies continue, because now instead of just 30,000 people, we can study 10 million people. And instead of following for 2 months, we can follow them for 6 months or 10 months or 18 months, and we can see what happens. So the final approval will happen after the emergency, I believe, is no longer in place, and we have those additional studies done. So I think there is a small risk. It is true that these are not as thoroughly evaluated as some other medications. And I would say if anybody's looking for a reason not to get vaccinated, you could probably use this as a reason. But if you're looking for a reason to get vaccinated, then I would tell you that I got vaccinated the first day it was available. Dr. Houck has been vaccinated. We ran towards the needle because we're working with people all day long who have COVID, and we realize how devastating this disease is.
Yeah, but I would add a little bit to what Dr. Butler said and emphasize that the process of using something under an emergency use authorization is a very, very formalized, set in law procedure. And as Malcolm mentioned, there has to be a declared emergency. There can be no other alternatives. There has to be evidence that what is being proposed to be used, in this case, the vaccine, is of more benefit than the potential risks are. And data after the vaccine, well, since December 13th, when the vaccine was first administered, has been a surveillance system in place to try to see if anything unexpected comes up, anything that didn't come up during the clinical trials. And by the way, one of the clinical trials, I think for the Pfizer vaccine, Confluence Health was part of that. So many of your fellow citizens in the community were actually part of the process that gathered the information to allow this to happen. It's not just for vaccines also. For instance, there was an EUA for hydroxychloroquine. It was later withdrawn when studies showed that this drug was of no benefit, and it actually was dangerous in this use. If you want to see this in action, if you want to see the process of the FDA in action, it was just announced by the FDA that the application by Janssen Biotech, which is part of Johnson & Johnson, is scheduled for, I believe, the 26th of February. And you can watch it if you want to. You can watch the whole thing. Go to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration website, and someplace on there that will tell you how to log on to those hearings. You can hear, you can see how it actually works. The same thing after the FDA gives its emergency use authorization. Then there is a group at the Centers for Disease Control called the Immunization Advisory Practice Committee, the ACIP, and they will then have a hearing to discuss what the FDA did and give recommendations for how the vaccine should be used. Also, that hearing will be available to you online live. If you want to see how it works, the ACIP will be online as well. Kind of interesting if you have a whole lot of time free to watch it, but it'll show you how it's actually done.
Thank you for speaking to the safety of this vaccine, because I think there's been a lot of questions around that. I'd like to ask a follow-up about some specifics. We're seeing questions about wondering if the vaccine is safe with underlying health conditions, with pregnancy, and with allergic reactions. Specifically, where in our community is the safest place to go if an individual has allergies?
Yeah, so thank you for those. So in medicine, if there are certain situations in which we should not use a drug or a vaccine, that is called a contraindication. And there are a few times when we should absolutely not use a medication. For this vaccine, these two vaccines that we have right now, the only contraindication is if somebody had an anaphylactic reaction to the first dose. There are warnings if people are known to have allergies to some of the products inside the vaccine, and there's a questionnaire you fill out, before you receive the vaccine, and it screens for all of that. Now, there is this known, recognized issue of an anaphylactic reaction. Anaphylaxis is different than an allergy. Most of us, when we think about an allergy, think about runny nose, kind of like I've got right now, or when you mow the lawn, right, and you have hay fever, or you're allergic to your dog, as I am to mine. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an anaphylactic reaction. Anaphylaxis is what most of us are familiar with from a severe bee sting or a peanut allergy. Some people can have the same thing to shellfish. And it's a very severe allergic reaction that progresses very quickly, and it can make it very difficult to breathe, and your blood pressure drops, you go into shock. The good news is that from a medical perspective, treating anaphylaxis is easy. You need epinephrine, and you need a telephone to dial 911. And when we have somebody with anaphylaxis, we stabilize them with epinephrine, we transport them to the hospital. Typically, they are observed in the ER, they receive fluids and some more epinephrine. They're observed there for 6 to 8 hours and they're released to home. Occasionally, they're admitted overnight. So in my medical universe, even though anaphylaxis is scary and happens quickly, it is not technically difficult to treat. At the Town Toyota Center, we have clinicians there who are observing people. And we have what we call a crash cart, right? So we're ready to go with the epinephrine, and we have an ambulance standing by if we need to transport somebody. At any medical facility where you might receive the vaccine, we also have clinical staff observing you. We also have a crash cart available with epinephrine. And we also know how to dial 911 and get you rapidly to the emergency department. So treating anaphylaxis, technically not terribly difficult, as long as you're receiving this vaccine at a site which is prepared, as you will be. Also, the incidence of anaphylaxis is about 1 per 100,000. I think it's 11 per million, something like that. So 1 per 100,000 is, a very small number. It's the incidence of being struck by lightning or something like that. People who have had anaphylaxis in the past to bee stings or peanuts or shellfish, those are the people we are going to observe for 30 minutes. So on the studies we've done of the anaphylaxis, essentially all of it happens within 15 minutes of the shot. And so we double that and we observe people for 30 minutes to make sure that they are safe before they leave. So if you just have an allergy to chocolate or to your dog, you do not need to worry about it. Now, again, that's the only contraindication I said was that severe reaction. So it is recommended in pregnancy. There is now evidence that being pregnant and getting COVID is bad for the mommy and bad for the baby. And so we do recommend it in pregnancy. We recommend it in breastfeeding. We recommend it for everybody. If you are in treatment for cancer and you're on chemotherapy and your immune system is very suppressed, or if you have a severe rheumatologic illness and you're taking immunosuppressants, or if you have had a transplant, you've had a heart transplant and you're on a lot of anti-suppressant or immunosuppressant medications, you should speak to your medical providers about that. And it's not because the vaccination will be dangerous, it's because it might not work, because your immune system is basically shut down because of the treatment you're undertaking. So what I like to tell people is that the vaccine is safer than Tylenol. It may be safer than water. So we, in the month of December in the United States, 2 million doses of vaccine were administered in that first month. Of those 2 million, 20 people had anaphylactic reactions. 2 of them were admitted to the hospital and they were both sent home the next day. Nobody died. Out of 2 million people in a month, there's probably at least one person who drowns in water or does something else silly with Tylenol. So the vaccine is safer than almost any other medication you have in your home. It is very, very safe.
Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about the vaccine's efficacy? How effective is the vaccine and how does it work in our bodies?
Do you want to take that, Peter? You want me to?
Sure, Mike. We can talk about how it works in the body. It's very effective. The 2 vaccines we have right now from Moderna and Pfizer have been shown to be roughly 90 to 95% effective at preventing disease, and that's remarkable. That's remarkable for a vaccine when you consider that the annual influenza vaccine that many of us receive is oftentimes somewhere in the 50 to 60% effectiveness range, and we consider that pretty good. Sometimes it's less than that. Now, so they're very effective. The next vaccine that's likely to come out, the one by Johnson & Johnson, is probably going to be roughly 85% effective against severe disease, maybe a little bit less effective against less severe disease, but still a very, very, very good vaccine. And the way that the vaccines work, like any vaccine, what we're doing is trying to trick the body into thinking it has been infected with this virus so that it produces antibody and all the other stuff that goes into the immune response against an infection. Now, these 2 vaccines we have now are relatively new in how they work and how they're manufactured. They're the messenger RNA vaccines. In order to fool the body into thinking it's been infected by the COVID virus, we want to have a particular type of protein in the body. It's called a spike protein, and the spike is the sharp little structure that's on the surface of the virus itself, and that's what the body's immune system actually recognizes. So it's really a clever way to trick the body. The messenger RNA is basically it's like a purchase order or a work order to have something done on your house. It's injected, it goes into the cells, and it tells the cells to make this protein, this spike protein. And then the body's immune system says, hey, there's this funny protein floating around here. We better make antibody to it. And that's how you get immunity. You're not injecting any DNA, which is the body's our fundamental genetic material. You're not injecting anything foreign. You're not injecting parts of a virus. You're not injecting whole virus. It's incredibly clever, and I think incredibly safe, actually, in the concept of how it works. But it's tricking the body into thinking it's been infected and making antibody.
Yeah, I like to tell people it's like we are injecting a menu. A recipe. So we're injecting a recipe that tells our body how to make this viral protein, the spike protein, as Dr. Houck said, so that it tricks our immune system into believing it's infected and developing an immune response. So as Dr. Houck said, this does not get close to our DNA. It's not made from DNA. I've had a bunch of people ask the question, well, gosh, does this use aborted fetal tissue? No. This, because we now have the capacity to read the genetic code of a virus, we can then copy down the recipe from the virus's genetic code, and we can then build the messenger, the recipe card, and inject that into your body. So there's no part of the virus, and there was no human flesh or anything else used in this development. It was all done in a laboratory, and the mRNA was built with chemicals that come out of a jar. So it's very safe in that way. And also because now we can read genetic code, we can do this much faster than we could in the past. So this new science allows things to happen much more quickly.
Yeah. I'm going to put in a plug here, as I usually do, for why this is an example of how all the investments that society has made in science, education, and research pays off in ways that at the time we did those things, we never would have expected. This is absolutely phenomenal science that is being applied to make these vaccines. I was a biochemistry major way back when, and I never would have thought messenger RNA was worth anything. It was just something to memorize. This is phenomenal. This is absolutely incredible when you think about it, and we think about how quickly it can be adapted. It's a great investment in education and research.
Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your enthusiasm. That's fun to see. How long does it take the vaccine to be effective? We've heard about wearing a mask and social distancing after getting the vaccine. Why do we need to do that?
So those are two slightly different questions. The number or the amount of time we are using right now is 2 weeks after your second dose. Now, a little nuance on that. After the first dose, if somebody's exposed to what we call the Wuhan variant, in fact, it works fairly well. But when we've tried to find antibodies in people after the first dose, we can't really find them. And so we thought, gosh, maybe it didn't work very well. So we recommended the second dose. And after the second dose, you can find oodles of antibodies. Well, it turns out the Wuhan variant, which is what we have now, is pretty stupid. It's easy to kill with antibodies. So it doesn't take many antibodies. So we're hopeful that what that means for the B117 or the UK variant, that it's going to be easy to kill that one too, and we're going to overwhelm it with the amount of antibody that we're producing. So those antibody titers should be maximal about 2 weeks after the second dose, right? And then there was a second half to your question. Remind me the second half.
Oh, regarding masking and distancing after receiving the vaccine.
All right. So I'm a family doctor who's practiced in a small rural community. Dr. Houck is an epidemiologist who worked with the CDC. So we may have different opinions on this part, but COVID-19 is really weird because 30% or 40% of the time, there are no symptoms. And do you even have a disease if you have no symptoms? That's a weird question to ask. Can you transmit the virus if you have no symptoms? We know the answer to that is yes, you can. So it's possible for people to basically pick up the virus, their body to reproduce it, and they can cough it out or breathe it out and infect somebody else. And when they were doing the studies for the vaccines, all they were looking for were people who developed symptoms of COVID-19. They weren't screening everybody every day with an antigen test because, frankly, we didn't have enough testing at that time to test 40,000 people every single day. And so the studies have not been done to prove that once you're vaccinated, you can't do that weird thing of picking up the virus, reproducing it, and transmitting it without developing any symptoms. Now, the simple country doctor says, it's like that has never happened before in the history of the world, so why are we worried about it with this vaccine? And it was pointed out to me that's not true. There are cases when that has happened in some types of vaccines, but it is rare. So it is almost certainly the case that it is going to be impossible to transmit the virus without developing any symptoms. However, the true scientist would say we don't know that yet. And because we don't know that yet, and to keep everybody safe, we should still wear a mask and socially distance and wash our hands. Now, I know both Dr. Houck and I think we should be celebrating this vaccine. This is such a huge victory, and anybody who gets it, it's better than being given an ice cream cone, right? I mean, this is huge. And I wish we could rip off our masks and we could say, finally, we've made it. And I suspect within 6 months, we're going to hear that message that we can do that. But for now, vaccination is like one more mitigation strategy. We've got masking, we've got hand washing, we've got distancing, we've got not gathering in crowds, we've got being outdoors. And now we've got vaccination, and it's a really good one. But for right now, unfortunately, the science isn't there to say it's totally safe to visit grandma without a mask. If grandma's been vaccinated, we all still need to wear a mask. Dr. Houck?
First of all, full disclosure, before I was an epidemiologist, I was a family doctor too, which I guess once a family doctor, always a family doctor. And I still practice in some very, very, very rural places. But everything Dr. Butler said is absolutely true. I think one of the amazing, in a bad way, amazing things about this virus is how little we still know about it. Consider that the virus has only been recognized for a few months more than a year. And we learned so much so fast. For instance, I recall last January of 2019, somebody asked me what I thought was going to happen with this thing and how many people might die in the United States in the first year. And I gave some answer that was, in retrospect, was totally embarrassing and totally ridiculous because it was so low. Well, at that point, we didn't fully understand one of the critical characteristics of this virus, which is that, as Dr. Butler said, people who have the virus in their system can transmit it and have no symptoms whatsoever. And that gives this virus an incredible advantage over the first the first SARS virus, the first coronavirus that caused SARS years and years ago, where that didn't work that way. And so that epidemic died out fairly quickly. This virus, if you want to call it smart, this virus is really smart and really clever. And that's made it very difficult for us. And we're still learning. Again, this thing of does the vaccine prevent transmission from people who don't have any symptoms? Well, we simply don't know. We're learning. Again, recall the vaccine has only been in general use for what, about 2 months now. So we're learning stuff every day. And both as a family doctor and an epidemiologist, it's fascinating.
Thank you. What about someone who has had the virus? Is it still recommended that they receive the vaccine?
So the short answer is yes. And this also is confusing because when the vaccines first came out, they were in such short supply that we were asked not to vaccinate people who had had COVID recently because we thought they would have natural immunity. And therefore, we could make our very limited supply of vaccine go further. Um, Within a couple of weeks, that recommendation was rescinded because people realized it was kind of ridiculous. Um, the other thing we know is that people who've been really, really sick, like in the hospital, kind of sick with COVID, it looks like most of them have a pretty strong immunity. And people who didn't get very sick at all, maybe they lost a sense of smell and had a headache, their immunity probably isn't all that good. And so the recommendation now is yes, anybody who has had COVID, once they're recovered, out of the hospital and back to full speed, not full speed, but, back out in public, um, should be vaccinated. And so the prior things you may have heard that you needed to wait a certain amount of time before vaccination, that's been withdrawn, that guidance. You just have to be outside of your 10-day isolation period, because obviously you can't go and get vaccinated if you're isolating at home. And then there's another question that comes up, well, what if I get COVID between the two shots? And we've seen that a few dozen times too. And the answer is the same. You wait until you've finished your 10 days of isolation, and then you can go ahead and get that second dose.
Thank you. Can you update us on the vaccine development for children?
I have not heard anything about that. Well, I've been telling people it's unlikely before 2022. I don't know, Dr. Houck, if you have any updates on that.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is basically the same, although clinical trials that include people younger than 16 are underway. I think there are a couple of issues with how long it might take to get the answers there. One is those kids had not been at as great a risk of becoming sick with COVID, so you have to wait longer to accumulate cases and so on. I think it's gonna happen, and I think Dr. Butler's estimate of 2022 is probably a reasonable one. We'll see what happens. People are looking.
That news is devastating, but thank you for sharing that. We've been hearing a lot about herd immunity, right? As we try to vaccinate, we're trying to reach that goal. At what point do you anticipate we will reach that in our community?
Yeah, take that one, Malcolm.
Please.
Okay. Well, herd immunity obviously talks about big groups of animals, cows, chickens. I guess they're not herds, sheep, or people. And the concept is that at when a certain proportion of a population has become immune to a disease, either through having the disease naturally or through vaccination, the outbreak tends to go away because the virus keeps bumping up against people, in this case, who are immune, and eventually it dies out. Now, there are a couple of problems with with the concept right now, and of even worrying too much about it. The first is that we really don't know what that proportion is with this virus that gives herd immunity. Is it 60%? Is it 70%? That was 70% is a number that's been tossed out a lot. Is it 80%? Dr. Fauci initially said 70%, and then he kind of upped it to 80 or 85%. That's the one thing. We really don't know what degree of immunity in the community is required for herd immunity. The other question, one that I have, and I think we all do, is what proportion of our community has immunity from natural disease? We don't know. We're not even, we could test for antibody in all these people, but it's not actually certain what amount of antibody it takes to give you natural immunity or how long it lasts. There actually is going to be a study possibly available to us looking at antibody, the prevalence of antibody in the population in the Chelan-Douglas counties. We won't have those answers for a long time. So I think right now, I believe we've covered about maybe 20 to 25% of the vaccine eligible people, the people over age 16 with vaccine. And I think we have a long ways to go before we have to worry about herd immunity. But we'll get there eventually, probably. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I guess I'm going to be the pessimist. I don't think we will ever reach herd immunity. I suspect that there will be enough vaccine hesitancy and people not getting vaccinated that we won't. And COVID will end up being something like influenza, where every year the people who are at risk need to get a booster vaccine to keep them safe through the winter months when coronaviruses tend to go crazy. And maybe we will. I would love it if we did. But just based on what we're seeing so far of the percentage of even the high-risk individuals who are concerned about getting the vaccine, I think when we ask 18 to 38-year-olds to get vaccinated, we're not going to be very successful. I hope I'm wrong. And, full disclosure, the vaccine's a little bit bumpy, After my first dose, my arm was pretty sore and my muscles were sore, and I couldn't tell if it was because the gym had just opened and I was hurting. But man, after that second dose, I was laid up for a couple of days. It was pretty rough. And at Columbia Valley Community Health, we've had about 50% of the people, we've had the Moderna, about 50% of the people who had the second dose said, man, that was tough. So it's not the same as a flu shot or some other shots where really you're a little achy for a few hours. This is a little bumpy.
Do you have advice for people as they're navigating that, what they can do to help make themselves more comfortable?
Yeah, well, it appears that being well hydrated is important. And certainly if you are caring for an elderly person who is frail, who gets the vaccine, they're going to need help. They're going to need someone checking on them throughout the day, bringing them, tea and chicken soup and the other things we do. Tylenol, acetaminophen, is profoundly effective at taking away these symptoms. So even during my rocky period, I took a couple of Tylenol and I was able to go snowshoeing up the Jacobson's Preserve, and then came back down and the Tylenol wore off and I was feeling not very good again. So really that's what it takes. It's rest and fluids and Tylenol and you'll get through it. And it's 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah. One little additional bit on the use of over-the-counter drugs. A couple of weeks ago, something came out in the press about avoiding the use of either ibuprofen, Motrin, or any of the so-called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or acetaminophen before you were vaccinated, out of concern that it might somehow diminish the body's immune response to the vaccine. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense for acetaminophen for a number of reasons. I think people are saying now you can take these drugs after you're vaccinated. I avoided any of them. I would avoid the non-steroidal things like Motrin and Indocin, things of that nature. I think I take acetaminophen afterwards. My own experience after my second dose was a little bit different from Dr. Butler's. I had a sore arm. I had some muscle aches, but I'd also taken a couple of fairly dramatic falls while skiing. So I had a good reason for hurting, just maybe like you went to the gym. And it lasted about 24 hours. The thing that I had that was most noticeable, I was just really tired. On day 2, I was exhausted, but that was gone after all that. And believe me, I'd much rather have had that relatively mild experience than have to worry about getting a disease that stood a reasonable chance of killing me. So.
I see that we're nearing the end of our hour. I was hoping I could invite you, Dr. Butler and Dr. Houck, to share your closing thoughts regarding the vaccine or the virus, or perhaps our county reaching phase 2, and before we close today.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I appreciate everybody taking the time just by the fact that you're watching this. I know that you are interested in public health and keeping our community safe, and I certainly appreciate that. I think right now the word is patience and grace. We need to be patient. This is a dramatic thing in the vaccine. We will have enough for everybody. And if you're frustrated now, please keep trying, be patient. And then also grace, and I think grace both towards the people who are calling you to cancel the appointments, and also grace to our neighbors who are concerned about the vaccine and wonder if it's going to be safe for them. Because I think within 6 months, we're going to have even better evidence than we have now about its safety. And I don't think it's irrational right now to wonder if it's a good choice for you. But over time, I think that data will come in, and then we'll know for sure.
I would second what Dr. Butler said about those two words, patience and grace. I would also add a phrase, stay the course. Keep doing what we're doing. Nationally, statewide, and in Chelan-Douglas counties, we've seen a dramatic decrease particularly over the last 3 or 4 weeks, in the number of cases that we've detected, the number of people hospitalized, and the number of people who've died. It's been a dramatic and very gratifying thing to watch, with the understanding that the reason why that has happened is probably because people in the community are doing what it took, what they did. They were doing the right thing in order to protect themselves, their family, and their friends. That is, wearing masks, social distancing, avoiding groups, and so on. All I'd say is right now, stay the course. We are not out of the woods yet, even though we have these 2 great vaccines. Keep doing what we've been doing. We will get out of this, but we're not there yet. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. Malcolm, always good to chat with you. See you again soon.
Good.
Thank you
Kristen.
both. I recognize that the virus and its effects have been polarizing for our community as it relates to businesses and our economy and the ever-changing and updating information we learn about the virus and the vaccine and restrictions. You spoke to that when you spoke to Grace. I know that this time has been difficult, and I appreciate this opportunity to support the public health efforts in our region and the opportunity for us as a community to learn about the COVID vaccine and the hope that it offers us in shielding our community from the effects of the virus. To our participants, I want to thank you for your constructive and productive questions. And to our panelists, Drs. Butler and Houck, I want to thank you for your participation. I sincerely appreciate your time and the opportunity to learn from you about your work. I'd also like to invite those watching to join us at the museum. All galleries at the museum are open by appointment at limited capacity. We also have engaging events online, such as the opportunity to get hands-on with makerspace projects, support local businesses through our Made in Wenatchee tasting series, or join community conversations such as these in our social justice series. We look forward to inviting Dr. Butler and Houck back again in 2 weeks for the continuation of this vaccine and COVID conversation series. Learn more at WenatcheeValleyMuseum.org. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you soon.